Hi, History 8. This is our last lecture video for our chapter on the West. Today is focused on just the Indians. It's kind of a sad part of the chapter because Americans really did a lot of wrong during this time period. So we're going to talk about that today. It talks about a lot of Americans moved west of the Mississippi River, but they didn't see themselves as moving into Indian land, even though a lot of them, especially like in the Oklahoma area, were completely taking over land that had been promised to the Indians. Most believe they were settling the American wilderness. It was given to America, but they kind of forget that there were people here before the Indians. For a while, the Indians did try to defend themselves from the white trespassers. The U.S. government made new treaties, and these treaties promised the Indians peace if they would remain in certain restricted areas of the West. The problem is they would give them one area and then say, nope, we're going to use that area for settling, move to this area. So it was just this constant, keep them moving. And they just kind of moved them over and over and over again. So if you can imagine, that's exhausting, especially because if gold was found in a certain area or silver, then people would just violate those treaties and those laws and didn't seem to care. And then these fail, and then it would make the treaty null and void, and then it would a lot of times lead to war. And the Indians became skilled fighters, and the U.S. Army was not used to fighting an unconventional army like this because Indians don't fight fair. I mean, it's war, so you wouldn't seem it's like it's a fighting fair thing. But remember, we've talked about they used to fight in lines and they fought out in the open. And they'd started changing their ways, but the Indians, are huge fighters in that. The army responded, though, by waging a total war. They would destroy entire Indian villages and crops. Sometimes they would kill the Indian women and children. The best known battle of the Indian Wars happened in 1876 near Little Bighorn River in Montana Territory. And I'm attaching in this post today another video on the Battle of Little Bighorn because I want you to watch that. And so this was in Montana Territory. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, he misjudged the strength and determination of a group of Sioux warriors, thought it was going to be a big, no big deal. If you've seen one of the Night at the Museum movies, they portray him as being scared to go into battle because he was overly confident in this battle and it failed miserably. He failed miserably. It's called Custer's Last Stand for a reason. And so the attack that led to his defeat at Little Bighorn, Custer's Last Stand, was led by Indians. Why can't I read? Named Crazy Horse and Gall. Sitting Bull, who stayed behind the lines, was a medicine man, and he's the one who kind of inspired the whole attack. Indian resistance ended as much from defeat as from the destruction of the buffalo herds. We kind of talked about that earlier this chapter. Just the amount of buffalo they were losing, and a lot of Indian groups relied on these buffalo, and so the loss of them really caused a lot of problems for the Indians. And the frontiersmen, like the people who lived on the frontier, really didn't have any sympathy for the Indians. They really didn't seem to care. I'm not saying all of them, but I'm saying a good majority of them didn't seem to care. Some Easterners said that mistreatment of Indians was inexcusable. It shouldn't happen. President Rutherford B. Hayes admitted in a national address, many, if not most, of our Indian wars have had their origin in broken promises and acts of injustice on our part. So even the president knows we're doing something wrong, but they didn't really fix it. It really didn't do anything to change their plight. In the same year that he made this speech, the peaceful Nez Perce tribe in Idaho, which was led by Chief Joseph, made a desperate attempt to avoid captivity by going to Canada. But the cavalry caught up with the tribe 40 miles from the border. They were cold and hungry and had little choice but to surrender. And so they were placed on reservations. And by 1855, all but a few scattered groups of Indians were forced onto these reservations. And one group was a rebel band of Apache Indians. Their leader was Geronimo. And he had escaped from reservations several times, and then he finally gave up in 1886. By the way, there is a note about Geronimo that he wreaked vengeance on Mexican authorities who murdered his family members. He fought against attempts to force Indians onto reservations. Later in life, though, he converted to Christianity, which was good, but he died, unfortunately, a prisoner at Fort Sill in Oklahoma, so that's just too bad. And by the way, your code word today is Geronimo. In 1890, there was a kind of a final defeat for the Indians seemed apparent. The Dakota Sioux gathered for a ghost dance. It's just kind of one of their rituals that they believed in. And they believed that one day the earth would die and be reborn. That's kind of what they envisioned for the future. And they thought the white men would go to another world and the Indians would then get their land back. And some of them claimed that they received special powers during this and it would allow them to kill whites. And some claimed that the shirts that they were wearing, they were called ghost shirts, would stop bullets. So they were thinking going into this battle that they were invincible. And unfortunately, we know that they were not. And so on December 29th of 1890, troops sent to disarm the Indians shot down almost 200 Sioux at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. This ended the many Indian battles, and the Indians were conquered. And this battle is just really sad if you ever want to kind of look up some information on it. It was just very unfair, and a lot of innocent were killed at this battle as well. Indians who had not resisted were made wards of the federal government, kind of like, it's kind of like if you're an orphan and you were taken into like child protective services, you're made a ward. So like the government has this responsibility to take care of you. And that's kind of what happened here for the most part. And when I say take care, I mean like take care of you. Not like kill you, but like they take care of you as the government sees fit, which is not always the best. And so a lot of them were supported by an annual payment system, and it placed them under federal protection. Missionaries often tried to help the Indians, meeting their physical needs while presenting them with the gospel. But if you can imagine, a lot of them are not interested in the white man's God, especially after all that they've been through, and they see a lot of their suffering as because of the white men, and so they're not going to follow the white man's God. And so then in 1887, there was a lot of sentiment like pro-Indian, like we need to help them out, belief in the United States. And so Congress decided to do something about it, and they passed the Dawes Act, which was in 1887. It assumed that the Indian way of life no longer worked. So they were like, what has happened before, them being in tribes just doesn't work, so we're going to try something else. It said the government would help Americanize the Indians. So like, let's make them more like us. It said the government would help them. They could be more like us, absorb them into our daily life. And under the Dawes Act, tribal unions were to be dissolved. So there were no more tribes. It was all based on individuals. Individual Indians were to receive land and become self-supporting. So they were supposed to be able to provide for themselves. Each head of a household, so like father in a family, was assigned 160 acres. But the problem was they didn't understand like what the Indians need. There were a couple of reasons this didn't work. First, most Western Indians, who were given land were hunters and traders. They were not farmers, so they didn't know what to do with the land. Second, the lands the Indians had been allotted were very dry. They kind of gave them the land that nobody wanted, and so it just wasn't good land for farming anyway. Let's see. So these parts of land couldn't really support their families. Another thing is the Indians were not used to the idea of personally owning the land because it was kind of everybody owns the land in a lot of their tribes. And so that wasn't, so the fact that they have a deed that says they own the land really didn't mean much to them. Another thing was their social unit, the tribe, and their extended family. A lot of times, even if they weren't with the tribe, they had like grandparents and aunts and uncles. Everybody was kind of together. And this tries to break that up, and that just doesn't work for them. And so when this breaks down, the Indian way of life suffers because it's not what they're used to. It's not their social structure. And of course, we have those greedy, I'm going to say greedy white men because that's pretty much what it was here. And they offered to buy Indian lands. But this is the thing is Indians own the land so they could sell it. But they didn't necessarily understand the money that we used. They were big into trading. And so a lot of times they got ripped off. And that's like the nice way to put it because they didn't really know how it worked, and so they were often cheated out of land, especially like if oil was found on Indian lands. Speculators, the people would buy the land and raise the price, would buy it for super cheap and then sell it for a huge markup. So if you can imagine, it's just too bad because it's just not fair. That's kind of where our chapter ends. It's kind of a weird spot to end, but I have a couple things that I kind of wanted to read from my book. One of them, it talks about let's see. treatment of the American Indians, I kind of want to talk about that. It says in here, it's easy for us to look at the treatment of the American Indians and recognize the injustice that they faced, just like we can look at slavery and know that that was completely wrong. Treaties with the Indians were ignored. Indians were coerced by various ungodly means to give up land that Americans wanted. Large populations of Indians were destroyed by warfare and disease at the hands of those who viewed them as little more than an obstacle. Like, they're in our way, we got to get rid of them. There were some Christians who worked to convert the Indians and help them survive in the changing environment, but many failed to treat the Indians as individuals created in the image of God. They forgot that. And so in every generation, it's a Christian's responsibility to treat others in the way that demonstrates the love of God and spreads the gospel, and I think people forgot that. There is a thing about Indians today. There are still Indian groups in the United States today. There are still some reservations. There are a lot of struggles, though, on those reservations. And so there are a lot of Indian tribes today trying to preserve the ways of the past. Some still live in their ancestral villages and they craft traditional jewelry and ceramics. Others have resurrected tribal languages and ceremonies. Interest in traditionally Indian religion has increased recently dramatically. So they're kind of going back to like the old religions that they believed in. I think I was in Ohio. They even had, I don't remember which Indian group. Sorry, I should have it was a lot. I was pretty little when we went, but they actually had I don't know what it was called. Like, there was an Indian tribe there, and you could go and see one of their like traditional ceremonies, and it had like the dance and stuff. And they sold like some of their jewelry and crafts to kind of help support the tribe, which was kind of neat. There are missionaries who do try to work among Indian tribes today, but there are mixed results. There's a lot of issues with alcoholism and just reliance on the government. And I'm not saying every reservation has this issue, but there are a lot of issues with alcoholism on reservations. And so, yeah, it just it makes it hard for missionaries. But if you can imagine, this life for the Native Americans has been tough. I know I read an article the other day about like COVID-19 and how that is also not helping out on the Indian reservations. That's making things harder as well. And so there are missionaries who do try to work with Indians, but it is hard. So another thing you could be like, as you're praying, be praying for our missionaries right now, because there's a lot. I can't imagine being a missionary right now with everything shut down and like some are away from their families in other countries where there's things shut down. That just popped in my head. So anyway, another thing that's kind of neat, but it's just not done, is the Crazy Horse Memorial. I tried to look up a picture of it. It looks pretty similar to the one in your book, which you can kind of see here. It's not finished. It's gigantic. It's actually fairly close to Mount Rushmore. And they've been working on it for more than 60 years. It's in the Black Hills of South Dakota. I don't know how far it is from Mount Rushmore, but it's not too far. It is a little bit of a drive, but it's really neat. They've been working on a monument to honor Sioux Chief Crazy Horse. He was never photographed in his lifetime, so this is kind of intended to portray a spirit, not like exactly what he looked like, because we don't know exactly what he looked like. Like Mount Rushmore, it's carved out of the stone face of a mountain. It's really neat. But unlike Mount Rushmore, the Crazy Horse Memorial is supposed to be a three-dimensional full-length statue. It's supposed to be him on top of his horse and stretching out his arm. It will be 563 feet high and 641 feet long. The head itself is 87 feet tall, and the outstretched arm will be nearly as long as a football field. And just so you know, so it's 87 feet tall. The four heads on Mount Rushmore are each about 60 feet. So the head is bigger than the heads on Mount Rushmore, which is huge. And then there's a sculptor. He started the project in the late 1940s and he worked on it until he died in 1982. They kept it going and the head was completed in 1998. The problem is they're having a hard time, I think, financing all of it because it's pretty expensive. They did carve out like a hole that you can drive through. I think it's in his arm. I don't remember, but it's just really neat. You could look up videos about it or pictures if you're really interested, because it is really cool. I would love to see it finished. I don't know, if it'll happen in my lifetime. It'd be great. I know they have been working on it, but yeah, I know they have lost money and funds for it. So anyway, that's our video for today. You actually will not see me the rest of the week on a history video. I know you guys are bummed about that because you are going to be finishing up the end of chapter stuff and kind of starting the next chapter. And so there won't be any more history videos this week. Make sure you send me the code word for today. And then I will see you guys on my hello videos Wednesday and Friday. And yeah, then I'll see you next week on a video for history. So we're going to do one more chapter, by the way, for this year, and then we will be done with history. So that's exciting. I can't believe it's the end of the year. It just seems so weird. So anyway, I hope you guys have a good day. Don't forget, send me the code word. And yeah, I will see you guys soon. Bye.